What children's cartoons have had weirdly dark episodes? Story 1, Hey Arnold. Ran from 1996 to 2004 and spent most of its runtime doing something that sounds simple but is genuinely rare. It took the interior lives of kids seriously. Not just the fun parts, the confusing, painful, embarrassing parts that most children's media either sanitizes or ignores entirely. The show dealt with homelessness in a way that didn't resolve it. It dealt with alcoholism in a parent. It dealt with a grandmother who showed symptoms that look, in retrospect, like dementia. It dealt with Stinky's complicated feelings about his absent mother. It dealt with Arnold's orphan status. His parents were missing, not dead. And the specific anxiety of that ambiguity ran beneath the entire series. The episode that gets cited most often is Helga on the Couch, an episode in which Helga, the show's bully character, sees a therapist, and the audience discovers the specific family dynamics that produced her. Her mother is an alcoholic. Her father is emotionally absent and focuses all his energy on her more conventionally successful older sister. Helga's romantic obsession with Arnold, the show's long-running joke, is revealed to be a coping mechanism for being unseen by the people who were supposed to see her. That's a psychologically coherent portrait of how neglect produces specific compensatory behaviors in children in a Nickelodeon cartoon. In 2001, the specific thing that made Hey Arnold what it was, creator Craig Bartlett treated the urban environment the show took place in as real, the kids' problems as real, and the adults' failures as real. Nobody fixed everything at the end of the episode. Some of the problems just stayed there, the way they do. Story 2, Rocko's Modern Life, had a long history of slipping adult content past the Nickelodeon censors through the specific mechanism of putting it fast enough or abstract enough that kids didn't catch it while adults absolutely did. The show was functionally two different programs running simultaneously. A children's cartoon about a wallaby adjusting to suburban life, and a fairly sharp satire of American consumer culture for anyone paying attention. The Christmas episode Hef in a Handbasket is the one that gets remembered as the most deliberately allegorical. Heifer, Rocko's bovine best friend, is pulled into a literal hell run by a character called the Devil, who is specifically staging a Christmas spectacular to keep souls entertained and distracted. The episode is framed around performance, deception, and a community of outcasts being kept hidden from the mainstream world. The allegory is specific and has been discussed extensively by the show's creators. The hell in the episode represents closeted identity in an era when AIDS was reshaping everything about what it meant to be different in America. The hidden community, the enforced performance of normalcy for a mainstream audience, the specific terror of a disease that the broader culture was treating as a punishment, all of it is in the episode, operating underneath the cartoon surface. The show aired in 1993. It was watched by millions of children who took it as a Christmas episode about a cartoonish version of hell. It was also a show about the AIDS crisis and identity in America, made by people who were living through that crisis, slipped onto children's television because the allegory was the only form it could take in that moment. That's what the show was doing. Story 3, The Peanut Strip, and its animated specials had a long history of going to unexpectedly real places. Depression, unrequited love, existential anxiety, under the protection of the pastel color palette and the rounded character designs that said this is a children's cartoon. But nothing in the main run hit quite the way the 1990 animated adaptation of Why, Charlie Brown, Why did. The episode introduced Janice, a new character who is Linus's friend from the neighborhood. In the episode, Janice is diagnosed with leukemia. She goes through chemotherapy. She loses her hair. She comes back to school with a headscarf and faces other kids' cruelty about it. Linus defends her in a scene that is, for a children's cartoon, remarkably direct about what cancer treatment looks like and what it does to a child's appearance and social experience. The episode doesn't end Janice. She goes into remission. But it doesn't pretend that cancer is something that resolves cleanly either. The episode lingers on the fear, the physical change, the the specific cruelty of children who haven't been taught empathy, and the specific loyalty of a friend who shows up anyway. It was funded by the American Cancer Society specifically to help children understand what a classmate going through cancer treatment might experience, to reduce the cruelty that comes from not understanding why someone looks different. Most adults had not seen this episode before finding it online years later. The combination of the familiar Peanuts art style and the subject matter, a child going through chemotherapy, losing her hair, facing other kids' fear and cruelty, hits differently than you'd expect from the franchise that gave the world Charlie Brown's Christmas Tree. Story for the episode is called Dee Dee and the Man. Dexter's Laboratory was a show built on physical comedy and the friction between Dexter's obsessive scientific genius and his sister Dee Dee's chaotic, cheerful destruction of everything he builds. The show was funny and fast, and usually not asking you to feel anything in particular. This episode is different. Dexter's light bulb burns out. The entire episode follows him trying to replace it, navigating the storage room, finding the right replacement, going through the process in complete silence. No dialogue. No music beyond ambient sound. It's a small problem played with quiet seriousness for the full runtime. At the end, Dexter replaces the bulb successfully. Dee Dee is watching him. She looks at the room full of light bulbs, hundreds of them, glowing, and says, "You know they'll all burn out eventually." Dexter looks at the viewer. He says, "I know." That's the episode. Children watching this in the late 1990s probably processed it as a quirky moment at the end of a weird episode. Adults who encountered it again years later have had a somewhat different experience with those two lines, which function as a fairly complete meditation on mortality, impermanence, and the specific sadness of building things that won't last forever. The light bulbs are everything you love. They burn out. You know they will. You replace them anyway, because what else are you going to do? And the episode makes this point with a dialogue-free 11 minutes and 2 lines at the end. It's one of the most effective pieces of writing the show ever did. Story 5, The Powerpuff Girls, was a show built around the specific comedy of very small, very cute girls being an extremely effective superhero team. The visual language of the show, the giant heads, the color-coded pastel palette, the flat design, communicated this is safe in every frame. The episode Speed Demon broke that contract completely. The girls are racing home and go too fast. They overshoot the present by 50 years and land in a future version of Townsville that is unrecognizable, dark, post-apocalyptic, the built environment ruined. The people who are still alive are traumatized and hollow-eyed. When they encounter the adult versions of their friends, who are now elderly and broken, the adults don't celebrate the girls' return. They're horrified. "Where were you?" the adults ask. "Where have you been?" Townsville spent 50 years without the Powerpuff Girls. Evil won. Everything collapsed. Him, the show's devil figure, rules the ruined city. The girls are confronted with what their absence meant, a world that didn't have them when it needed them and couldn't survive without them. The episode ends back in the present. The girls go home. They don't race anymore. The horror isn't jump scare horror. It's the sustained dread of a world that went wrong while someone was distracted, and the specific guilt of having been absent for a catastrophe that could have been prevented. That's a genuinely adult register of fear, delivered in a show aimed at 7-year-olds in the pastel visual style of a show about candy-colored tiny superheroes. The people who watched it as kids and found it in adulthood have consistently described the same experience. "Oh, that's why it scared me so much." Story 6, as told by Ginger, ran from 2000 to 2006 and was a middle school drama that genuinely committed to the specific emotional reality of being a girl that age. Not the cartoon version, the real version, with all its awkwardness and confusion and specific pain. The show dealt with the dark poem episode. Ginger writes something in her journal that's dark enough that a teacher finds it and refers her to the school counselor. The episode doesn't play this as an overreaction or as comedy. It plays it as the specific experience of having your private emotional processing suddenly become a matter of institutional concern. The vulnerability of being read by adults who are trying to help, but who also have power over you. The absent father storyline ran across multiple episodes and was handled with more nuance than most adult dramas attempt. Ginger's father left. He occasionally reappears, and occasionally disappoints again. The show didn't give him a redemption arc that erased the damage. It showed what it actually looks like when a parent's absence shapes a family over time. The effect on Ginger's mother. The specific way the absence affected Ginger's self-image and relationship patterns. And then, Ginger almost died of appendicitis. The episode treats it as a medical emergency. Fear, uncertainty, surgery, the specific terror of someone you love being in danger that you can't control. Not played for drama in a cartoon way. Played the way a sudden medical emergency actually feels. The show is criminally underseen now, partly because it exists in a gap between children's and teen programming that means it doesn't quite fit either nostalgic category. It was doing more emotionally honest work than most of what surrounded it. Story 7 Static Shock went places with gang violence, racism, and disabilities that most live-action shows avoided. Static Shock ran from 2000 to 2004 on Kids WB and was a superhero show that took its setting, Dakota City, explicitly coded as a stand-in for any major American urban area, as seriously as its superpowers. The show's creator, Dwayne McDuffie, had specific things he wanted to say about being black in America, about urban violence, about the specific challenges facing black teenagers, and he said them in a Saturday morning cartoon. The gang violence episodes weren't abstract. The show depicted what gang recruitment actually looks like, the specific appeal it has for kids in communities where legitimate paths to respect and safety feel closed off. Static's friend Virgil nearly joined a gang not because of peer pressure in a simple sense, but because of the specific logic that membership offers. The show took that logic seriously, rather than dismissing it. The racism episode brought in a character who was a victim of genuine racial violence, handled the specifics of that violence without looking away, and then complicated the audience's sympathy by showing how trauma can curdle into something destructive. That's a more sophisticated treatment of the relationship between racism and its effects than most content aimed at adults manages. The disability episodes, particularly those dealing with Richie's dyslexia and a later storyline involving a deaf character, treated disability as part of a person's experience rather than as either their defining characteristic or their obstacle to overcome. Characters with disabilities were full characters who happened to have disabilities, and the show did an episode with Adam Beach and a pro wrestler about Native American representation that was building cultural awareness for 10-year-old viewers who were probably not getting it anywhere else. Story 8 Batman Beyond was doing corrective camps, body modification, and parental loss in the time slot after Superman Batman Beyond, ran from 1999 to 2001, and was a sequel set 40 years in the future, in which an elderly and injured Bruce Wayne mentors a teenager named Terry McGinnis as a new Batman. The show had the Batman franchise's license to go darker than most children's animation, and it used that license. The corrective camp episode, Shriek and related installments dealing with the Inkay storyline aside, the episode specifically about a facility claiming to fix troubled teens through genuinely abusive conditioning, depicted institutional abuse in a way that was specific and unsettling. The camp promised parents it would correct their children's behavior. What it was actually doing was closer to what we'd now call conversion therapy in its mechanics, systematic punishment of authentic self-expression until the subject learns to present an acceptable surface. The episode named this for what it was. The loss of Terry's father, which drives the show's premise, is handled with genuine weight. Terry's father is murdered by the Joker's gang. The grief is not processed and resolved within an episode. It's the reason Terry becomes Batman, and the show returns to it as a source of ongoing motivation and pain, rather than treating it as backstory that can be set aside. The body modification episode dealt with teens choosing to physically alter themselves to belong to specific gangs, a literal embodiment of how identity formation in adolescence can take self-destructive forms when legitimate community is unavailable. The show's villain in this arc wasn't cartoonishly evil. He was someone who had found a way to exploit that specific adolescent need. The show was produced by the same team as Batman, the animated series, and maintained the franchise's commitment to treating its subject matter as worthy of real craft. Story 9, Tom and Jerry, is a show about a cat and a mouse inflicting elaborate physical violence on each other, sustained by cartoon physics that resets everything at the start of the next scene. The violence is consequence-free by design. The show's comedy depends on the audience understanding that nothing that happens in a Tom and Jerry cartoon actually matters, which is why the episode Blue Cat Blues hits the way it does, and why the ending involving a bag of kittens at the pearly gates is the one that sits with people who encountered it. The episode involves Tom genuinely suffering over a romantic rejection. A cat he loves chooses someone else. Jerry narrates. Tom ends up on a train track with Jerry, both having given up on life. The episode, unlike standard Tom and Jerry, has genuine emotional weight. Tom's loss is played as real loss, not cartoon loss. And then there's the other moment, not in this episode specifically, but in the broader Tom and Jerry history, where Tom dies and approaches the pearly gates at the same time as a bag of drowned kittens. Saint Peter, processing both arrivals, looks at the bag and says, "What some people won't do." That line is doing a lot of work. It's a quiet condemnation, not just of whoever drowned the kittens, but of anyone who watches that and doesn't register it as wrong. It's a moral observation in what is ostensibly a children's cartoon about slapstick violence. The show had a talent for occasionally stepping outside its own logic to make these observations. Saint Peter's line is the most efficient version of it. 6 words that constitute a complete ethical statement about animal cruelty, delivered in passing, in a cartoon. Story 10, Courage the Cowardly Dog, ran from 1999 to 2002 and follows a small pink dog living on a farm in the middle of nowhere with his elderly owners, Muriel and Eustace. Each episode brings some kind of threat or horror to the farm, which Courage has to defeat while his owners fail to register the danger. The show is, on its surface, a children's cartoon about a scared dog saving his family from monsters. It is also one of the most effectively disturbing horror anthologies ever produced for any demographic, which is something that takes a while to understand when you're a child watching it, but lands immediately when you encounter it as an adult. The specific thing Courage does that most horror fails to do, it creates genuine attachment to characters before threatening them. Muriel is genuinely lovable, gentle, trusting, kind to the dog she calls My Courage. The horror of each episode is specifically the threat to her, which means the horror is not abstract but personal. You don't want Muriel to be hurt because you like Muriel. The episode The Mask is an allegory for domestic abuse that is so direct that it's difficult to understand how it aired on Cartoon Network in the early 2000s without more comment. The episode Courage in the Big Stinkin' City is straight horror filmmaking. The episode Perfect ends with a speech from a computer about what it means to be imperfect that adults cry about and children absorb without fully understanding. The show was made by John R. Dilworth with a specific artistic vision that treated children as capable of handling real fear and real emotion. The result is something that functions as children's entertainment and as effective horror simultaneously. Story 11, Invader Zim did body horror on Nickelodeon. In an episode so disturbing that it's still talked about 20 years later, Invader Zim ran for about a year and a half on Nickelodeon starting in 2001 before it was canceled. Officially because of ratings and production costs. Unofficially because Nickelodeon had acquired something significantly more intense than it knew what to do with. Creator Jonan Vasquez was an underground comic artist whose work dealt in grotesque body horror and pitch-black comedy, and he brought that sensibility to a children's network. Dark Harvest is the episode that gets cited most consistently when people talk about the show. Zim, who is an alien invader masquerading as a human child, becomes concerned that his alien anatomy will be noticed by the school nurse. His solution: he begins surgically harvesting organs from his classmates and replacing his own missing anatomy with them. He takes a classmate's lungs. He takes someone's intestines. He harvests organs during class, while his teacher isn't paying attention, leaving classmates bulging with the stuff he stuffed into them to cover the gaps. The episode plays this completely straight. It's body horror. It functions as body horror. Nickelodeon aired it. What's specifically disturbing about Dark Harvest isn't just the subject matter, but the commitment. The show doesn't pull back. It doesn't soften the images, the classrooms full of kids bulging in wrong places, the matter-of-fact quality of Zim's organ collection, the specific fact that nobody in authority notices. All of it functions as genuine horror that happens to be animated. The episode was widely considered the most unsettling thing Nickelodeon ever aired. Nickelodeon's response was eventually to cancel the show. The episode remains exactly as disturbing as it was in 2001. Story 12 Avatar: The Last Airbender introduced bloodbending, controlling human bodies, and made it traumatic rather than cool Avatar. The Last Airbender was a show with genuine sophistication about power. It thought about what bending, the ability to manipulate water, earth, fire, or air, would actually mean, physically and ethically, if it were real. Most of the show's treatment of bending was about the drama of combat and the spiritual dimensions of elemental connection. The puppet master goes somewhere else. Hama is an elderly woman, Katara, and the group encounter who is a waterbender. She escaped from a Fire Nation prison camp where waterbenders were kept locked up specifically to prevent them from bending, kept away from water until they were harmless. Hama's escape involved a technique she discovered in isolation. The human body is mostly water. A sufficiently advanced waterbender can manipulate the water inside a person's body. She can control another person's movements against their will. The show takes time with the specific horror of this discovery. Hama learned this technique in desperation, in captivity, as a survival mechanism. The trauma behind the send is as present as the send itself, and when Katara is confronted with the technique, the show doesn't let her simply refuse it. Hama forces her to use it. Katara uses bloodbending for the first time on a person who can't consent to it, under coercion from someone who was herself victimized. That's a layered ethical situation. The show is asking about what trauma does to people, about how methods of survival in oppressive contexts become their own form of horror, about whether knowing a technique makes you responsible for having it. For a show aimed at children, it's doing remarkably nuanced ethical work. Story 13 Teen Titans did a PTSD episode in which Robin hallucinated his enemy for an entire episode, and nobody called it Mental Illness. Teen Titans was a superhero show that committed, unusually for its format, to the psychological consequences of the things that happened to its characters. The Slade storyline, in which Robin's obsession with his recurring villain becomes its own kind of pathology, paid off and haunted. An episode that functions as a fairly direct depiction of trauma and dissociation while never using any clinical language. Slade has apparently died. Robin begins to see him. Not as a memory or a flashback, he sees Slade as present, real, giving orders, attacking him. He fights Slade. He chases Slade. His teammates cannot see Slade. Robin insists he's real. Robin's mental state deteriorates visibly across the episode as he pursues someone only he can perceive, sustaining injuries from a threat that his friends can't verify. The eventual explanation is a toxin. Slade coated his mask with a substance that produces hallucinations in whoever touches it, and Robin's obsessive handling of the mask exposed him. That's the in-universe explanation. But the episode's texture, the specific quality of Robin's experience, the isolation of not being believed, the way the hallucination feels more urgent to him than anything his teammates can offer, functions as a representation of what trauma and its psychological aftermath actually feel like. The episode came at a time when mental health discussions for children were largely absent from mainstream entertainment. Teen Titans didn't call what Robin experienced PTSD. It showed what it looked like: the spiraling, the insistence, the physical deterioration, the specific loneliness of experiencing something that no one around you can see, and let viewers sit with it. Story 14, Young Justice's traumatic training simulation, was about grief and wasn't actually resolved when the episode ended. Young Justice ran from 2010 to 2013 on Cartoon Network and was a superhero team show for teenagers that took superhero team show for teenagers and asked what that would actually feel like, not as an adventure, but as an experience for real people with real psychology. Failsafe is an episode built around a simulation. The premise: the team undergoes a training exercise that unexpectedly becomes total. They experience it as fully real. And what they experience, fully and viscerally, is the complete defeat of the Justice League. The senior heroes they look up to are ended, one, by an alien invasion. Then their teammates start dying. They fight, people they care about die. The situation becomes more and more hopeless, and eventually the simulation ends. Except the trauma doesn't end with the simulation. The show's next episode deals explicitly with the aftermath. The team members carry the emotional weight of having fully experienced the deaths of everyone they cared about, even knowing it wasn't real. Wally is especially damaged by it. Miss Martian, who inadvertently made the simulation feel so real, has to confront what she did. The show treats the psychological aftermath as its own real event, not something that disappears when the plot explanation arrives. You can know something didn't happen and still be damaged by the experience of having believed it did. That's a psychologically accurate point about trauma that most media for adults doesn't bother to make. The team went through something terrible. Then, they had to live with having gone through something terrible. The show didn't skip the second part. Story 15, SpongeBob SquarePants, had an episode about depression that contains one of the darkest frames in cartoon history. SpongeBob SquarePants runs on a particular register of comedy that involves SpongeBob's relentless optimism bouncing off Squidward's relentless pessimism. The joke has always been that SpongeBob can't be dampened and Squidward can't be cheered. That dynamic is meant to be funny. Are You Happy Now? Takes that dynamic seriously and follows it to somewhere uncomfortable. Squidward is asked about his happiest memory and realizes he doesn't have one. Not in the way the question is asking. He tries to remember a genuinely happy moment and nothing surfaces. SpongeBob. Because SpongeBob can't help but try to fix things for people he cares about, attempts to manufacture a happy memory for Squidward, and each attempt fails. Squidward retreats. He locks himself away. The episode contains a frame that has been widely discussed online as one of the darkest single images in the show's history. Squidward, standing on a table with a rope around his neck, about to step off, which is revealed to be him preparing to hang a birdcage. The visual is a hanging joke. It's played as a misunderstanding, and it ran in a children's cartoon because it's technically a gag about hanging a birdcage. Whether it was an intentional dark joke that got past censors or an unfortunate visual that nobody caught in production is something that has been discussed without resolution. The image is what it is. The episode's larger concern, a character who cannot locate a genuinely happy memory, who encounters the specific despair of realizing that the texture of your life has not included what you were told it should include, is handled with more weight than Squidward's character usually receives. Story 16, Batman. The animated series wrote Mr. Freeze's origin as a tragedy and changed how animated villains work forever. Before Heart of Ice, Mr. Freeze was one of Batman's campiest villains, a cold pun machine in a refrigeration suit. Comic book silly. The animated series writers Paul Dini and Bruce Timm decided to rewrite him from scratch, and what they came up with won an Emmy and permanently altered the character for every subsequent adaptation. Victor Fries is a scientist whose wife Nora has an incurable illness. He cryogenically freezes her to give himself time to find a cure. His unscrupulous boss, who has been funding the research, decides the project is too expensive and orders it shut down. And when Freeze resists, arranges for an accident that leaves Freeze permanently dependent on sub-zero temperatures to survive. Freeze becomes Mr. Freeze. He pursues his boss for revenge while continuing to search for a way to cure Nora. That's the story. The episode tells it in fragments, through Batman investigating Freeze's crimes and piecing together what he is. The moment of revelation, Batman discovering Nora's frozen chamber and a tiny home video of Victor and Nora together, happy before everything went wrong, is played completely straight. No music cue that signals feel something now, just Batman watching a video of a man who loved his wife, and the wife who is frozen waiting for a cure that may never come. Heart of Ice made the argument that animated villains could be genuinely tragic, not just sad backstory as a box to check, but actual grief and loss as the engine of who a person becomes. The argument was accepted. Nearly every animated villain treatment since has owed something to what that episode did. Story 17 Batman, the animated series, ended Batgirl in an entire episode that turned out to be a nightmare over the edge as a Batman. The animated series episode that begins with Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, falling. She hits a car. Commissioner Gordon, her father, holds her as she dies. In dying, she tells him the secret. She was Batgirl. Bruce Wayne was Batman. Gordon's response is grief transformed immediately into rage. He goes after Batman. He works with Bane. He hunts down the Bat family with genuine intent to destroy them. The episode plays this completely straight. The Commissioner, who has been Batman's uneasy ally for the show's entire run, becomes a genuine antagonist driven by the loss of his daughter and the betrayal of having been kept from knowing who she was. The episode runs to near completion before the reveal. It's Robin's nightmare. None of it happened. Barbara is alive, but the episode has done real work by the time the reveal arrives. It has shown what Bruce's secrecy costs. Specifically, it has shown the version of Gordon that exists when he believes his daughter died, keeping a secret from him. The nightmare is Robin's, but the underlying fear it expresses, that Batman's secrecy puts the people around him in danger and keeps those who love them from understanding that danger, is one of the most legitimate criticisms of how Bruce Wayne operates. The episode uses the dream structure to say something true about the show's central ethical tension without having to pay the price of actually ending Barbara. But it earns the emotional weight. You feel the grief and the rage before you learn they're not real. And that feeling doesn't entirely dissipate with the reveal. Story 18 Danny Phantom showed its protagonist's worst possible future and made the audience sit with it. Danny Phantom was a Nickelodeon show about a teenager who accidentally got ghost powers and now fights ghosts while managing the complications of being half dead. It was fun and funny, and mostly light on consequence. The ultimate enemy is the two-part special that takes consequence seriously. Danny is given a glimpse of a future version of himself, Dark Danny, who has become the most powerful and most destructive ghost in existence. The path to this version: in the original timeline, Danny cheated on a test, got his family and closest friends ended in an explosion, and then, in grief, merged with his ghost half in a way that destroyed his human conscience. Dark Danny is what's left when Danny loses everything that makes him Danny. The show takes time with the deaths, not graphically, but with weight. Tucker, Sam, Jazz, his parents, the people Danny cares about most, die in the original timeline in a way that the episode makes you feel as loss rather than as plot convenience. The character of Dark Danny is scary, specifically because he's recognizably a version of Danny who went through something too big to survive intact. The episode's real concern is about grief as a source of destruction, about how losing the people who anchor you can remove whatever limits you had. Dark Danny doesn't become evil because of a villain's influence or a magical transformation. He becomes evil because everyone he loved died, and he didn't have the resources to survive that. For a Nickelodeon show, That's a specific and psychologically grounded portrait of how trauma can produce something monstrous. The episode doesn't pretend otherwise. Story 19, Gravity Falls, had an ancient interdimensional horror casually threaten to end children on Disney Channel. Gravity Falls ran from 2012 to 2016 on Disney Channel and was created by Alex Hirsch as a genuine love letter to weird fiction. Twin Peaks, Erie, Indiana. The specific texture of growing up somewhere that feels like it contains secrets. The show was for kids, and it was for adults who remembered being kids who felt like the world had hidden things in it. Bill Cipher is the show's central villain, an ancient, interdimensional, triangular entity with one eye and a top hat who exists in the dream world and has been trying to manifest in the physical world for untold ages. He's cheerful about it. He's chatty. He makes deals. He tells jokes. And then occasionally, he says something that is completely direct about his intentions. "I'm watching you." Nerds is the PG version. The specific line that gets cited, "I've got big plans for your little town, kid, and you're not going to like them," is almost understated compared to what he's actually shown capable of. There are extended sequences in the Weirdmageddon arc where Bill physically transforms the town of Gravity Falls into something out of a nightmare, including a throne made of frozen people. The specific achievement of Gravity Falls is that it made Bill Cipher genuinely threatening without losing his comic energy. He's entertaining to watch, and he is actually dangerous. The combination is specific. Very few antagonists in any medium manage it, and the show deploys it in a way that lets children experience genuine dread alongside genuine fun. The finale commits to real stakes. Things don't go back entirely to normal. The show respects the audience enough to let the world be changed by what happened. Story 20, Adventure Time, revealed Ice King and Marceline's past and made dementia a central theme in a show about Candy Kingdom's Adventure Time. Spent most of its run world building a post-apocalyptic Earth populated by candy people, magical dogs, and a human boy named Finn, who is, it eventually becomes clear, one of the very few humans left alive. The show's tone was joyful and absurd, and frequently very funny. And then occasionally it would do something that hit hard enough to stop you. I Remember You is the episode people cite most when they talk about what Adventure Time was capable of when it wanted to be. Ice King, who spends most of the show as a comical villain, a lonely old man who kidnaps princesses because he wants companionship, visits Marceline, the ancient vampire queen, asking her to help him write a song. She's cold to him. He doesn't understand why. As the episode unfolds, the audience pieces together what Marceline knows and Ice King doesn't. Ice King used to be a man named Simon Petrikov. Simon found Marceline after the apocalypse, when she was a small, traumatized child, and he took care of her. He sang to her. He found her a stuffed bear. He was her person. The magic crown he found gave him power, but was slowly destroying his mind. As Simon wore the crown more, he forgot more. He forgot Marceline. He forgot being Simon. He became Ice King, an entirely different personality with no memory of the man he was. The song they write together in the episode is Simon's final attempt, before he lost himself completely, to communicate with whoever might know him after he was gone. Marceline has the note. Ice King is the person in the note, and he doesn't know it. The dementia allegory is not subtle, and it is completely effective. Story 21, Steven Universe, depicted a panic attack with clinical accuracy in a show built around magical gem battles. Steven Universe ran from 2013 to 2019 and was, across its run, one of the most emotionally sophisticated animated shows for any age group, dealing with trauma, grief, found family, the complexity of identity, and the specific challenges of being a child, expected to carry the burdens of adults who had complicated histories. The show got better at this as it went. Mindful Education is a Stevani episode, Stevani being the fusion of Steven and Connie, a character who exists when the two of them are in emotional sync. In this episode, Connie is struggling with guilt over having accidentally hurt a classmate at school. She can't stop thinking about it. The more she tries not to think about it, the more present it becomes. The episode shows what happens when intrusive guilt thoughts become a panic attack. The visual language shifts. The environment fragments. Connie's experience of the present is interrupted by overwhelming images from the past. The show depicts this with genuine accuracy, not as dramatic collapse, but as the specific quality of being unable to stay in the present moment, unable to prevent the intrusive imagery from flooding in. Garnet teaches Connie a grounding technique: focus on the physical present, come back to the body, return to what's actually here. This is a real therapeutic intervention, depicted accurately and calmly in a children's cartoon, framed as something you can learn and practice rather than something that happens to you and can't be managed. The episode trusts its audience, children and adults, to take this seriously. It doesn't wrap it in a lesson segment or call it out. It just shows what a panic attack looks like and what a grounding technique looks like, and then continues the story. Story 22, The Loud House, did an episode about family exclusion that made viewers deeply uncomfortable. The Loud House is a Nickelodeon show about Lincoln Loud, the only boy in a family with 10 sisters, and the specific chaos of living in a very full house. The comedy comes from the scale and the personalities. The show is generally warm, a large, messy, loving family. No such luck as the episode that landed wrong for a lot of viewers in a way that the show apparently didn't intend. Lincoln, sick of being dragged to his siblings' activities, pretends to be bad luck, so they'll stop bringing him. The plan works, but it works too well. His family decides he really is bad luck and begins excluding him from everything. He's locked out of the house. He has to sleep outside. At family events, he's made to wear a squirrel costume and sit apart from everyone else. The episode is played as comedy. The family eventually learns the truth, and Lincoln is let back in. Normal situation comedy resolution. What made it land badly for many viewers, adults who encountered it years later, and apparently some kids who watched it at the time, is that the mechanics of the episode's comedy are the mechanics of family exclusion and public humiliation. Lincoln is isolated from his own family, made to wear a costume that marks him as different and outside the group, and this lasts long enough that the episode's premise becomes specifically uncomfortable. The show wasn't trying to make a point about bullying or family exclusion. It was trying to make a point about honesty through comedy. But the specific way it staged that comedy mapped too closely onto what actual exclusion looks like for the comedy framing to fully contain it. The internet has a lot of feelings about this episode. Story 23, Gargoyles, opened with the near-total genocide of its main character's species and didn't soften at gargoyles, ran from 1994 to 1997, and was a Disney afternoon show that had no business being as good as it was. Created by Greg Wiseman, it was Shakespearean in its structure and its themes: betrayal, honor, the weight of history, what it means to be a monster in a world that only sees your appearance. It was also, from its opening episode, genuinely tragic. The premiere begins in medieval Scotland. A clan of gargoyles, stone by day, alive at night, protects a castle and the humans who live there. The relationship is complicated. The humans are afraid of the gargoyles. Some resent them. Some are grateful for the protection. The gargoyles don't fully understand how tenuous their position is. The betrayal comes from a human lord who manipulates the situation so that most of the gargoyle clan is destroyed while they sleep, in stone form during the day. Shattered, the episode doesn't cut away. You see the statues broken. You see the aftermath. The survivors are few. The leader Goliath, his mentor Hudson, and the 3 younger gargoyles who were in detention that day. Then a castle witch curses the survivors. They will sleep until the castle rises above the clouds. They do. They sleep for 1,000 years and wake up in Manhattan in 1994. The show is about loss from minute one. The gargoyles are the last survivors of their kind in their homeland, carrying a grief that predates the entire modern world. The show treats this as its emotional core rather than as backstory to be set aside. It is a Disney afternoon show, and its premise is the genocide of its protagonist species and the long aftermath of that loss. Story 24, Justice League Unlimited traps Superman in an illusion of Krypton never having exploded, and made him choose to leave for the man who has everything, adapts a 1985 Alan Moore comic and does something specific with it that requires sitting with. It gives Superman exactly what he would want most, and then forces him to choose to give it up. The villain Mongul plants an alien plant called Black Mercy on Superman. The plant feeds on psychic energy and gives its host a perfect hallucination of their deepest wish. Superman's wish? Krypton never exploded. He has a family there. He has a son. He is not Clark Kent or Superman. He is Kal-El, living the life he would have had if his planet had survived. Wonder Woman and Batman arrive to find Clark completely unresponsive. They have to fight Mongul while also trying to free Superman from the plant. When they manage to weaken the connection, Superman begins to see through the illusion. He starts to notice inconsistencies, and he has to make a choice: keep the beautiful lie or tear it away and return to being Superman. The specific thing the episode does with this choice: it makes you feel what Superman is giving up. The son is specific. The family is specific. The life is specific. He destroys it knowingly because the real world needs him and the beautiful world isn't real. He destroys it in anguish. The episode Superman is grief-stricken after the plant is removed. He says almost nothing. He finishes the fight because the fight has to be finished. The emotional damage of having had and then lost something he will never have, done in a Justice League cartoon for Saturday morning. Story 25. Codename Kids Next Door ran from 2002 to 2008 and was a show about a secret global organization of children who fought against adult tyranny and oppression. The adults in end were cartoonishly villainous. Their crimes were things like making kids eat vegetables, enforcing bedtimes, assigning too much homework. The show was comedy built around a child's emotional reality. Adults have power over you and use it. The show's underlying mythology had a darker element that it developed over time. The Kids Next Door organization had a rule: operatives aged out at 13. When you turned 13, you were decommissioned. Your memories of being a NEND operative were erased. You became a teenager and then an adult, and you forgot. The finale, Operation IT, confronts this directly. It doesn't resolve the question of decommissioning by revealing it's wrong or overturning the rule. It reveals that the decommissioning system exists for reasons that the organization's founders understood, that the adult world has to be infiltrated by people who've forgotten being children, because someone has to do that work. The rule is sad, and it's necessary, and it doesn't stop being sad. Number 1, the series protagonist, is recruited, without his full understanding, into a covert role that requires him to leave his team, leave his friends, and leave his childhood behind. He gets on a ship. The episode watches him go. The show's premise was always that childhood ends and you forget. The finale just made the kids acknowledge it directly, instead of pretending the show could go on forever. It's a more honest treatment of what the show was always about than most series finales manage. Story 26, The Legend of Korra, showed its protagonists post-traumatic depression for an extended arc and didn't rush the recovery avatar. The Last Airbender ended with a resolution. The Legend of Korra, its sequel, opened the next era of the Avatar cycle and kept raising the difficulty. The third season finale does something that most action-oriented shows for children don't. It shows its protagonist be broken and stay broken for a while. Korra is poisoned by the Red Lotus, not just injured, but systematically damaged through a process designed to end the Avatar cycle. She survives, but the damage is lasting. Book 4 opens 3 years later. Korra has spent those 3 years in recovery, physically and otherwise. She can't immediately walk. She struggles with basic Avatar abilities. She is haunted by a vision of herself as she appeared when she nearly died. The Avatar state, chained, being destroyed. The show depicts this not as a temporary setback before triumphant recovery. The recovery is slow and non-linear and not fully complete. Cora's depression and PTSD, the show doesn't use those words but depicts both accurately, are treated as real consequences of real damage, not as plot obstacles to overcome in a single training montage. Book 4 follows Cora as she fights her own mental state as much as any external enemy. The final villain of the series is someone who exploits Cora's trauma in ways that make the conflict specifically personal and specifically psychological. Most action shows for children either don't show lasting trauma from violence or resolve it quickly. Cora's damage persists. The show gives it time. That's a specific choice about what the show wanted to say about recovery. It's not fast. It's not linear. And it's worth showing honestly. Story 27, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, put the personification of death in indentured servitude to two children and played it for laughs. The premise of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy sounds like a setup to a dark fable. Billy and Mandy, two children, challenge the Grim Reaper to a game of limbo to save their hamster's life. They win through Mandy's ruthlessness and Billy's accidental chaos. Their prize, Grim, the actual embodiment of death, is their best friend forever. He has to do what they say. The show ran with this premise from 2001 to 2007 and found an extraordinary amount of comedy in it. Billy is stupid in a way that's genuinely funny. Mandy is terrifying in a way that's played almost entirely for comedy, but occasionally for something closer to genuine dread. Grim is pathetic and occasionally dignified, and usually just trying to manage the specific indignity of being death and being bossed around by elementary school children. The show's underlying macabre premise is operating constantly underneath the comedy. Grim is death. He's done this job across the span of human existence. He has existential knowledge that Billy and Mandy can't comprehend, and he's been reduced to helping a stupid child with his homework and a terrifying girl with her schemes. The show is occasionally interested in what this actually means for Grim as a character. Episodes that let him have dignity, or that show the specific loneliness of being a being who ends lives professionally and can't form lasting connections, do something with the premise that goes beyond the comedy. They don't do it often. When they do, it lands. The show is ostensibly about a boy and a girl with an unusual friend. The friend is death in servitude. The show never stopped finding that funny, and occasionally found it genuinely moving. Story 28, Justice League Unlimited's Batman Beyond crossover revealed a darker origin for its protagonist than anyone expected. Justice League Unlimited ran from 2004 to 2006 and was the culmination of the DC animated universe that had begun with Batman, the animated series, over a decade earlier. The show was dense with continuity and was written for the audience that had been following these characters for years. Epilogue is a Batman Beyond crossover episode that retroactively rewrites Terry McGinnis's origins. Terry, the teenager who becomes the new Batman in the future of Batman Beyond, discovers that his DNA has been altered. His genetic father, effectively, is Bruce Wayne. This was not an accident. Amanda Waller, the show's morally complex government operative, arranged it. She used a nanotech solution to rewrite the genetic material in Terry's biological father's reproductive cells without his knowledge. Terry's parents raised him as their own, not knowing that their son was genetically engineered to be Bruce Wayne's successor. The episode then reveals why Waller did this. She believed Batman was necessary, that the specific combination of Bruce Wayne's genetics and a specific kind of childhood trauma would produce the next Batman. She had arranged everything, including, she implies, the murder of Terry's biological parents, to ensure that trauma happened. She stopped herself at the last moment from ordering the actual murder. But she designed a system intended to produce a traumatized child who would become a vigilante, because she believed the world needed Batman. That's what the show calls moral darkness, someone who is genuinely trying to protect people, and it was calculated that producing a specific child's suffering is worth the outcome. The episode doesn't entirely condemn Waller. It doesn't let her off the hook either. It presents the situation and lets the audience decide. Story 29. Ed, Ed and Eddie was a show about three kids: the scheming Eddie, the intellectual Double D, and the enthusiastically dim Ed, running scams on the cul-de-sac and getting their comeuppance. It was slapstick, elastic, consequence-free in the way that cartoons are. The physics didn't stick. The injuries didn't stick. The day the Ed stood still turns this elastic safety off. Ed, inspired by a monster movie, builds himself a monster costume. Something about the costume or the boy in it takes on a different quality. He begins hunting the other kids. The neighborhood, which is normally a safe playground for slapstick chaos, becomes a horror movie environment. Kids hide. Kids flee. The tension is played straight, genuinely suspenseful rather than comedically fearful. The episode leans into the horror conventions deliberately. The slow monster, the hiding places that might not be safe, the specific dread of something that used to be familiar now being threatening. Ed doesn't become actually dangerous. The episode resolves in the standard way, but the texture of the episode while it's happening is genuinely tense in a way the show usually deliberately avoids. What makes it work as horror, rather than just comedy horror, is the commitment to the genre's rules. Ed's pursuit is patient. The other kids' fear is real to them. The show's normally elastic visual style tightens into something more controlled. It's an experiment in what happens when the genre conventions of the show's normal register, safety, elasticity, consequence-free chaos are temporarily suspended and replaced with something that demands more attention. Story 30: The Amazing World of Gumball ran from 2011 to 2019 on Cartoon Network and was, across its run, one of the most formally inventive children's animated shows ever made. It mixed animation styles in ways that made the visual language a constant source of comedy and occasionally of genuine strangeness. The show was built on absurdist humor and rapid-fire jokes. It didn't slow down very often. When it did, it was usually worth it. The Silence, the Ollie episode, introduces a background character who has been present but unheard for years, a student who never speaks. When the show finally addresses why he never speaks, the reveal is handled with unexpected care. Ollie has selective mutism, a condition tied to anxiety in which speaking, particularly in social situations, is genuinely not possible even when the person wants to communicate. It's not shyness. It's not a choice. It's an anxiety-based condition that the show names accurately and treats with the dignity of something real. The episode doesn't resolve Ollie's selective mutism. He doesn't suddenly speak at the end because friendship gave him confidence or some other narrative convenience. The show acknowledges that this is how he is, that it's connected to real anxiety, and that the appropriate response from his classmates is to find ways to include him and communicate with him, rather than to expect him to conform to what communication looks like for them. For a show built on absurdist chaos, to stop and do this carefully, in one episode, and then move on, that's the kind of tonal control that looks easy and isn't. Story 31: Rugrats made a villain who looked like he crawled out of a slasher movie and put him in a children's cartoon Rugrats, ran from 1991 to 2004, and was a show about the interior lives of babies and toddlers, their interpretations of the adult world, their fears, their small dramas. The animation style was deliberately grotesque in a warm way. The babies had large heads and small bodies and moved in that specific, overdetermined baby way. The mysterious Mr. Friend introduced a toy, a wind-up dancing doll, called Mr. Friend that Angelica receives and is obsessed with. The toy becomes the episode's source of horror, not through any supernatural event, but through sheer design. Mr. Friend is designed, apparently deliberately, to be as unsettling as possible within the show's visual register. He dances mechanically. His smile is fixed. His eyes are too large. His movement is wrong in the way that dolls in horror movies are wrong. Not quite. Not quite. Never quite right. The episode spends considerable time with Mr. Friend's presence as the babies encounter it, and the babies react with the specific terror of things that are almost familiar but not. The uncanny valley, the specific register of wrongness that near-human or near-familiar things produce, is functioning here. Mr. Friend is a toy, and he looks like what a horror filmmaker would make if they were asked to design a toy to appear in a horror film about toys. The episode is played as comedy. Angelica loves Mr. Friend. The babies are scared of him. The comedy comes from the gap between Angelica's attachment and the baby's reasonable terror. But Mr. Friend's design choices are not accidental, and the effect on children watching is the specific discomfort of the uncanny rendered in a familiar, safe visual register. Story 32 Codename Kids Next Door's series mythology turned out to be about betrayal, loss, and generational trauma, the surface of Codename Kids Next Door. Kids in a treehouse, fighting adults who want to make them eat vegetables, conceals a mythology that gets genuinely complicated. The show built its backstory slowly across its run, dropping details that retroactively recontextualized earlier episodes. Operation Zero is the episode where the mythology pays off most explicitly. The origin of the Ken's founding villain, Father, and his relationship to Numbu Zero, the organization's founder, is revealed. Father is Numbu Zero's son. His childhood was defined by his father's belief in the Ken's mission to the exclusion of everything else, including his family. Father became who he is specifically because of what the N took from him, a parent who was present for the organization rather than for his child. The show is revealing that the organization its heroes believe in, and that the adults are the enemy of, was built on a specific human cost. The founding generation's commitment to the cause damaged the people closest to them. Father is the generational consequence of that damage. That's a mature structural argument, that institutions can be genuinely good and still produce harm in the people around them, that the next generation bears the cost of the choices made in the name of the mission. It's the kind of observation that takes decades of adult experience to produce, and is being delivered in a show about kids in a treehouse shooting milk from soda straw cannons. The show trusted its audience to follow it there. Story 33 Static Shock did a school shooting episode that was so good Nelvana won an award for it in 2004. Static Shock aired Jimmy, an episode that addressed school gun violence directly. The episode is worth its own examination beyond the general note in the Static Shock entry, because it's one of the most carefully constructed pieces of children's television on the subject. Jimmy is a kid at Virgil's school who has been bullied for years. When he brings a gun to school and injures another student, the episode doesn't treat this as a simple story about a bad kid making a bad choice. It shows the history, the bullying, the teachers who didn't intervene, the specific accumulation of humiliation and helplessness that produces a person who stops seeing any other option. The episode is specifically not sympathetic to Jimmy's action. It's clear that what he did was wrong, and that the injury was real and not okay. But it's also clear about the conditions that produced it, and it holds those who participated in creating those conditions accountable, the bullies, but also the adults who saw and did nothing. Static's response, not just as a superhero stopping violence, but as Virgil Hawkins, a classmate who also knew Jimmy, is handled with more complexity than the format usually allows. He recognizes something of himself in Jimmy's isolation, even if his choices diverged completely. The show won a Prism Award for the episode, which specifically recognizes accurate portrayal of mental health and substance use issues. A children's cartoon addressed school gun violence with enough nuance and accuracy to win an award for responsible portrayal of a crisis that adult television was still struggling to handle. Story 34 Teen Titans Season 5 finale ended a main character on screen, and then ended the show. Teen Titans ran for 5 seasons on Cartoon Network, and its final season dealt with the Brotherhood of Evil and their attempt to eliminate young heroes worldwide. The show was good at raising stakes and then having the heroes overcome them. Season 5's finale does something different. It doesn't fully take it back. Terra, a character who had been a Season 2 major villain turned tragic figure, returns in Season 5 as a teenager who has no memory of being Terra. She's just a girl. The show heavily implies that she is Tara but declines to resolve it. Tara's ending in Season 2 had her turned to stone while saving the world, and the show never confirms whether this new character is Tara restored or someone who simply resembles her. But the Season 5 finale itself, dealing with multiple character fates in the context of a global conflict, contains Pantha's death on screen. During combat, in a moment the show doesn't cushion. Pantha, a character whose development had been building through the season, is ended by the Brotherhood's operative while protecting another hero. The show shows it. There's no immediate reversal. Characters die in children's television more rarely than the stakes of action storytelling would require. When they do, the tendency is to either fade to black before the moment of death or to reverse the death within the same episode. The Pantha moment is played as a death in the context it occurs, and the emotional weight of it persists into the rest of the finale. It's a small thing in the context of what the episode is trying to do. It's also representative of the show's willingness to mean what it says. Story 35, Why Cartoons Keep Going Dark, and Why Kids Keep Remembering. The thing underneath every entry on this list: we've been through 34 episodes. Dancing plagues of light bulbs burning out. Tom and Jerry at the pearly gates. Batman making someone choose to give up their dead planet. An ancient vampire carrying the notes of a man who forgot her. Two kids who own death. A cartoon dog finding horrors in a farmhouse at the edge of nowhere. An Iceman standing over his frozen wife, hoping time will save her. The question people always ask about these episodes is, why did they make it so dark? Who allowed this? How did it get past the network? But the better question is why these episodes specifically are the ones people remember. Not the funny episodes, though some of those are remembered too. These ones, the ones that went somewhere real. Children's media does dark things when it trusts children. When the people making it believe that the audience, even the youngest audience, can handle encountering grief, loss, fear, complexity, moral ambiguity, the specific weight of caring about something that can be taken away. The dark episodes on this list exist because their creators believed children deserved stories that took those things seriously. And children responded, not with trauma, but with the specific memory of having been treated with respect, of having been told, through the story, that your feelings about hard things are valid, that fear is real and loss is real, and sometimes things don't resolve, and sometimes the light bulbs burn out. The cartoons that did this well are the ones that still live in the people who watched them as children. The episodes that went dark are the ones that proved the audience could be trusted with something real. The darkness wasn't the point. The trust was the point. Story 36, The Simpsons did an episode about Bart potentially dying that the show has never acknowledged since The Simpsons has done dark episodes before. Bart's dog gets an F. One fish, two fish, blowfish, bluefish. The various Homer almost dies episodes. The show uses darkness as punctuation for its comedy, and it usually finds a way back to the normal register by the end. Bart gets hit by a car is an episode that gets cited less often than it should, because what it does with death is genuinely strange for the show. Bart is hit by Mr. Burns' car. He dies, briefly. The episode shows Bart in heaven, then in hell, then returned to life when the devil checks the paperwork and finds Bart isn't due yet. This is played for comedy, and it largely works, but the episode pivots hard in its second half. The family hires Lionel Hutz to sue Mr. Burns, and Marge is called to testify. She can't lie about Bart's condition. She tells the truth when lying would have won the case. Homer, who had been counting on a big settlement, is furious. The episode is really about honesty, destroying a financial windfall that the family desperately needed, and about Homer choosing to be furious at Marge rather than proud of her. The dark register is marital, a good person doing the right thing and being resented for it by someone who loves her. The Simpsons at its best was always doing this, using the cartoon format to say real things about the specific difficulties of family life. This episode is a clear example. It's not remembered as a dark episode because the darkness is emotional and marital rather than dramatic. But the experience of watching a woman be honest at cost and be punished for it by her husband is bleaker than most of what the show is remembered for. Story 37 Bluey did an episode about miscarriage that parents recognized instantly and children watched as something else. Bluey is an Australian children's cartoon that runs approximately 7 minutes per episode and is aimed at preschool-aged children. It is also, consistently, one of the most emotionally intelligent shows currently in production for any audience. The show understands, in a way that most adult media doesn't, that children's experiences are real and that adults' experiences are real simultaneously, and that a good story can serve both at once. The show is an episode in which Bluey puts on a play about the family for her dad Bandit. The play covers Bluey's birth, Bingo's birth, and then a third birth. A baby that doesn't appear in the show. A baby the audience hasn't seen. Parents watching the episode understood immediately the missing third baby represents a pregnancy loss. The show doesn't explain this. It doesn't use any clinical language. It just includes the space where a sibling might have been, presents it in a child's play as something real in the family's history, and lets Bandit's reaction, quiet, controlled. The specific expression of a parent hearing something acknowledged, communicate everything. Children watching the episode see a play Bluey puts on for her dad. They see him get a little emotional. They see the family hug. Parents watching the episode saw something being acknowledged that is almost never acknowledged in children's media. That loss of this kind is part of many families' histories, that children often know something happened without having the language for it, and that telling a story about it in a way that a child can witness without being harmed is possible and valuable. 7 minutes. One of the most precisely calibrated pieces of children's television ever made. Story 38 Toy Story 3 is technically a film rather than a cartoon episode, but its inclusion here is justified by what it does. It takes a franchise built entirely on the premise of a child's relationship with his toys and follows that premise to its logical, devastating conclusion. Andy is leaving for college. The toys end up at Sunnyside Daycare by a series of misfortunes, and the film builds toward an escape and a resolution. The resolution takes a specific form. The toys are on a conveyor belt, headed for an incinerator. The opening is closing. There is no visible escape. The toys look at each other. Woody reaches for Buzz's hand. Buzz takes it. Jessie takes Woody's other hand. They all reach for each other. They are accepting that this is the end. They are dying together, holding hands, looking at the fire coming up beneath them. Then the claw saves them, and the film continues to its actual ending, which involves Andy giving the toys to a child named Bonnie and playing with them one last time before he leaves. The incinerator moment is the one that destroyed people, not the Bonnie scene, which is genuinely touching. The moment of acceptance, toys who have been abandoned and reclaimed and threatened and survived reaching for each other in the face of death, is what broke the adults in the audience, because adults know what the toys are representing. They've felt what the toys are feeling. The acceptance of ending, the choice to face it together rather than alone. It's a moment of grace in a franchise about plastic toys, and it worked because the films had spent 3 movies making you care about plastic toys for exactly this reason. Story 39. Recess ran from 1997 to 2001 and was a Disney show about elementary school playground politics. The social hierarchies, the codes, the specific experience of navigating a closed social world where you have no choice but to be there every day. The show was usually warm and comic, built around a group of 6 kids with different personalities who stuck together against the social order. The Experiment is the episode that took the show's usual social observation register and pushed it somewhere that got it banned in some countries, notably in France, where the episode was pulled. The episode's premise: the kids decide to observe what it's like for a boy and a girl to hold hands. They choose TJ and Spinelli to be the subjects. TJ and Spinelli hold hands. The social consequences are immediate and catastrophic. The other kids treat them as if they are a romantic couple. The attention is unwanted and destabilizing. The episode explores how the act of labeling something changes how it's experienced by everyone involved, including the people doing the thing. The episode was banned in some markets specifically because of the relationship between the episode's content, two kids holding hands becoming socially coded as romantic, and anxieties about how children's media represents relationships and social dynamics. What the episode was actually doing was a fairly precise observation about how social labeling works. The act of naming something changes the experience of it. TJ and Spinelli weren't feeling romantic about each other. The community's insistence that they were, its labeling of their action, created a social reality that didn't match their actual experience. That's a real and valuable observation for children about how peer pressure operates. Some countries found that observation more than they wanted a children's cartoon to make. Story 40, What Makes the Dark Episodes Land. Why cartoons can go where live action struggles to follow we've been through 39 episodes and films and shows. A light bulb going out? That means everything. A boy holding a sleeping child's hand in a ruined city and singing to her while he still could. Toys holding hands in a furnace. A boy losing his parents and spending 40 years as someone else while the person who loved him waited. Two children who own death. A cartoon dog in a house at the edge of nowhere where the warmth is always under threat. An ancient villain who is tragedy in a frieze suit. Something specific happens in animation that almost never happens in live action. The visual register signals safety, and the story exploits that signal. When you watch a cartoon, particularly a cartoon associated with your childhood, a part of your brain is already prepared for certain kinds of experience. The rounded shapes, the bright palette, the elastic physics, the familiar format. These are cues that say this is a protected space. You're watching a Saturday morning show. You're watching a children's special. The guardrails are up. And then the show uses that safety to take you somewhere you didn't expect to go. Not in spite of the format, but because of it. You're less defended than you would be watching a live-action drama specifically designed to make you feel things. The cartoon got through. The dark episodes on this list are remembered so clearly because of this mechanism. They reached people at an age when the emotional architecture was still forming, using a format that lowered defenses and left marks that decades haven't erased. Every adult who found Courage the Cowardly Dog terrifying, or cried at the Ice King flashback, or sat in a theater while toys held hands above an incinerator was reached by something that knew how to find them. That's what the best children's media does. It finds you when you're open, and it leaves something true behind.